I was folding laundry when Jenna's call came through, her name popping up on my screen like a starting pistol. It was a Friday afternoon, the sun already halfway to the horizon, and I just stacked a small basket of damp towels on the bed, the lavender scent still clinging to them. My knee throbbed behind the fabric. It was one of those dull, constant aches that reminded me of my follow-up appointment the next morning. A routine check after surgery, nothing dramatic, but important enough not to skip. Still, I hesitated before tapping answer. I knew her voice would come with a request. She only called when she needed something. When I picked up, the air between us crackled just slightly. "Hey, Mom," she said, voice brisk, skipping any preamble. "Can you watch Emma this weekend? We've got our work retreat in Asheville, and Nate's parents are watching Tommy. We'll be back late Sunday." The words landed with surprising weight, as though she had tossed a brick into my quiet afternoon. I sat down on the bed, smoothing the towels out of my lap. I pictured her family's living room, rugged weekend clothes strewn over the sofa, the baby gate across the hallway, the pink plastic tea set waiting on the coffee table. I pictured Emma, 10 months old now, toddling around on chubby legs and babbling her happy nonsense. My heart wanted to leap to her side. But the other voice in my head was louder. My own weariness, the dull firing of needles in my knee, joined the echo of the doctor's reminder, no heavy lifting until next week. "Jenna, sweetheart," I began, keeping my tone gentle. "I can't this weekend. I have that follow-up appointment Saturday morning. You know I'd love to help, but my knee still isn't quite ready for all-day carry and chase." I exhaled, bracing myself. A pause. Then her voice, flat, clipped. "Oh. Okay." You could almost hear the eye roll through the phone. "I guess you're not really being supportive of our family then." Her words hit me like a slap. Every laundry load I'd washed. Every dinner I'd brought over when she had new jobs to juggle. Every sleepless night I'd spent rocking a feverish baby, I felt it all flash by in an instant. I wanted to remind her of the co-signed mortgage, the daycare fees I'd covered, the times I'd dropped everything to comfort her on a bad day. But I swallowed the retort. What good would it do? The silence stretched until I heard her inhale sharply, as though she were bracing for a fight. "I'm sorry you feel that way, honey," I said instead. My voice was calm, but I could feel the frustration pooling in my chest. "You're their parents. I have every confidence you'll find someone else to help this time." Her laugh was short and bitter. "Right. Sure. I don't know what we're going to do now." And then she hung up, the click of the line severing our connection so cleanly I nearly flinched. I stared at the phone, the screen still lit with her name. My hands twitched as if reaching for the argument I hadn't allowed myself to voice. Knee stiff, I set the device on the bedside table and walked to the window, watching the traffic flow on the street below. Neighborhood kids pedaled past on scooters, flags fluttered listlessly from their lawns, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary except for me standing alone with a heart pounding too hard. I tried to let it go by reminding myself that self-care was not selfish. My health mattered. A simple doctor's visit shouldn't become a battleground. I made myself a cup of tea in the kitchen, Earl Grey, a touch of honey, and carried it back to my room. I didn't take a sip. The steam curled up like an unanswered question. Less than an hour later, my phone chimed again. A text message this time. "Please don't come by the house anymore. It's time for some boundaries. We've changed the locks." I read it twice before I believed my eyes. I checked the screen again, heart pounding. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, had sent me a text to bar me from her home. I pictured the locks clicking each turn, a judgment: "You are no longer welcome. Go away. Stay away." The realization felt like ice water poured down my spine. I drove to their house anyway. Disbelief propelled me forward. I kept thinking it must be a mistake. Maybe the babysitter misunderstood. Surely she'd call back to apologize as soon as she realized how it sounded. Perhaps she'd been under stress, her words sharper than she meant. Rational mind and emotional mind sparred fiercely in the car as I coasted through the familiar streets. I parked across the street from the pale brick colonial we'd painted together years ago. The same deep green front door Jenna had chosen while pregnant with Emma. I stood beside my car and just stared. No lights on inside, no sign of movement. The stroller was folded on the porch, one tiny sneaker abandoned under the swing. The scene was frozen and achingly empty. I rang the doorbell once, twice, 3 times. My key one they had made just in case caught in the lock and refused to turn. The door stayed firmly shut. I walked back to the car, legs unsteady, and slid into the driver's seat. My face came unglued in breathless laughter, more ridiculous than comforted. Me, sitting alone, laughing at the absurdity of being locked out by my own daughter, as though I were an intruder instead of the woman who'd sung lullabies and baked pies and co-signed every mortgage payment. The laughter died in my throat, replaced by a hollow ache I couldn't quiet. By the time I got home, dusk had settled into the house. I tossed my coat on a chair, set the kettle to boil, another habit I hadn't broken, and wandered through the rooms as if in a daze. The framed drawings from Emma still clung to the fridge, wobbling, hearts block letters spelling out, "Best grandma ever." I stared at them. Had I imagined her love? Had it dissolved as soon as I said no? I sat down at the kitchen table, the toast I'd made growing cold before I could touch it. I opened the fruit drawer to distract myself, sorted apples by color, then slammed it shut. The silence pressed in. Outside, streetlights flicked on, one by one, their glow threadbare against the gathering night. In the bathroom mirror, I recognized the shock in my own eyes, surprised that kindness and sacrifice could be erased so easily. I thought back to every whispered plea Jenna had made in the middle of the night for help, every shopping run I'd dropped everything to make, every holiday I'd spent cooking 12 courses, while she and Nate relaxed on the couch. How could a single refusal outweigh all of that? My phone buzzed, once more, another spam alert about car insurance, and I let it lie. In the dim kitchen light, I realized that her words, so sharp and final, had carved out a new boundary for me, whether I wanted it or not. I could claw back the door, demand a conversation fight to restore what had been lost. Or I could simply accept that one day's refusal had redrawn the lines of my life. I leaned my head against the cool table, the ache in my knee echoing the ache in my heart, and closed my eyes. The lavender towels lay folded on the bed upstairs, waiting for me to rescue them from the basket. But tonight, I didn't have the strength to rescue anyone else, not after being cast out with words so small and yet so complete. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of that single no settle into something I could carry. Tomorrow, I'd decide what to do next. Maybe I'd call a friend. Maybe I'd go to the appointment and insist they let me rest a little longer. Maybe I'd let the silence stretch. In that unspoken space, I realized I was learning the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes love means saying yes, but it also means holding firm when yes is impossible, and accepting the consequences with whatever dignity remains. I was cleaning up the kitchen, wiping down counters, stacking dishes when my phone buzzed again. I'd barely had time to set my tea aside before its screen lit up with Jenna's name. My stomach sank. There's no good reason she'd be calling now. My appointment was tomorrow, and I'd already told her I couldn't help this weekend. I swiped the lock screen open and saw the message. "Please don't come by the house anymore. We've changed the locks." The words stared back at me like a slap in the face. It was so final. No, please, no, thank you for everything. Just a severance of years of trust reduced to a demand delivered by cold text. I dropped the dish towel in my hand, the fabric slapping against the sink with a hollow smack. I stared at the phone as though I could will the message back into unread obscurity, but it sat there, bold and unwavering. Grief hit first, a pang behind my ribs that made me catch my breath. My mind surged with memories: the nights I tucked squirming toddlers into cribs, the hours I spent coaxing tears from a feverish child's cheek, the countless casseroles I delivered when work deadlines kept Jenna at the office. Each small kindness flashed like a Polaroid in my mind. Then anger flared sharp as a knife. How dare she? After everything I'd done to be treated like some stranger locked out of the home I'd helped build. My legs felt weak and I sank onto the edge of a kitchen chair. My fingers trembled as I reread the message. They'd literally changed the locks on the door I used for 5 years. The key, once lodged firmly in my palm, a token of welcome, was suddenly useless. My throat tightened with words I couldn't voice. You owe me an apology. I raised you. Where would you be without me? But none of those things mattered anymore. The decision had been made. The lock turned, and I was outside looking in. I drove immediately. Call it stubbornness or disbelief. I needed to see it for myself. The streets were quiet as suburban roads often are on a summer evening, sprinklers humming on neat lawns, the distant hum of lawnmowers, children calling to each other from behind hedges. I parked across from their house, the pale brick 2-story where I'd once painted the front door green, with Jenna, her round pregnant belly brushing against my elbow as we joked about how grown up it looked. The memory cut deep. The porch light was off. The stroller was still folded neatly by the door, and one tiny pink sneaker lay under the swing as if waiting for someone to pick it up. I crossed the street, each step echoing in my ears. I lifted my hand and rang the bell once, twice, 3 times. No answer. My heart pounded as I jiggled the old key in the lock. It caught and jerked, but the deadbolt refused. She had changed the locks just like she said. My shoulders slumped, and I walked back to the car, careful not to let my tears spill in public. I didn't laugh this time. There was nothing funny about being locked out by your own daughter. Instead, a heavy grief settled in my spine, pulling me down until it felt like I was being swallowed from the inside out. I sat behind the wheel, the engine turned off, and let the rain of tears come soft, relentless. Each drop tasted of betrayal, not just for this one weekend, but for every moment I'd been there year after year, offering support that now meant nothing. At home, I moved through the rooms like a stranger in someone else's life. I didn't turn on the lights, but let the dusk's pale glow guide me. The china hutch, once polished for family dinners, looked cold and empty. I wandered to the front window and stared out at the street, half expecting to see Jenna pulling up in her minivan, just one more apology before the locks changed. But of course she never came. I sank into my favorite armchair, clutching the blanket I kept over the back. The house hummed around me, the refrigerator's soft buzz, the clock's steady tick, the faint echo of cicadas humming outside. I wanted to scream, to shake my phone until the message vanished, to call her up and demand answers. But I felt too hollow for even that. Instead, I sat very still, letting the shock and anguish wash over me. Memories swirled like dust motes in the lamplight, rocking Emma to sleep, patching scraped knees, calling a plumber when the pipes froze in winter. I remembered every card, every handshake, every thank you muttered after birthdays, baptisms, graduations. I had kept no tally, but the invisible ledger of love and labor was written in the walls of her home. And with one text, she'd wiped the slate clean. I remembered the cards from Emma on the fridge, shaky hearts drawn in crayon block letters spelling out, "I love Grandma." It struck me then how quickly those tender messages were overshadowed by a single directive: we've changed the locks. I opened the fridge door and stared at the magnets without seeing them. No one needed to reach for carrots or milk anymore, because I was no longer welcome. I wandered to the bedroom and found the photo album we'd made after Jenna's first wedding. I pulled it off the shelf and thumbed through the pages: newborn cuddles, toddler birthdays, family vacations. All of those captured moments, evidence of a mother's devotion, seemed rendered meaningless by one final act of exclusion. I closed the album and set it aside, feeling the weight of its spine like a closed book on a life I no longer shared. I tried to sleep, but the darkness felt too complete. At midnight, I made tea I never finished, pacing the kitchen until the kettle cooled. Every corner of the house seemed to echo with her absence. The plush living room rug, once alive with playdates, lay flat and empty. Even the rocking chair in the corner, once my favorite spot to sway with a sleeping infant in my arms, felt deserted. In the small hours, grief gave way to anger again, a slow burn that warmed my cheeks. How could she treat me like this? Had every dinner I'd cooked gone unnoticed? Had every ride to doctor appointments for her children been nothing more than a convenience she could discard? The thought of it made my jaw clench. When dawn finally crept in, I rose and moved through my routine with mechanical precision. Coffee grounds snapped into the filter microwave. Beep toast popped up golden. I drank a few sips of coffee, but couldn't swallow the rest. I looked out the window at my own front porch. No locks changed there, no messages barring me. It was mine still. For a moment, I let that simple fact settle in, though she had locked me out of their home. She could not lock me out of my own. By mid-morning, I found myself at the front door with the old key in hand, an echo of a life that once included her without question. I slid it into the lock and it opened with the familiar click. The house smelled of lavender and polish, the same scent that clung to my linens. I stepped inside as though passing through a threshold into another world, one where my presence was still welcome. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, absorbing the silence that was now mine alone. The grief lingered, but beneath it was the realization that I still had a home, and it was here, not across the street. Decades of support might have been erased in an instant at Jenna's house, but they had not erased my worth, my dignity, or my place in the world. I set the key on the entry table and turned to the living room, where the early light filtered through curtains into the dust motes dancing in the air. I realized I had a choice: succumb to the void she created, or begin rebuilding the boundaries that honored my own needs. The grief was real, but it needed room to breathe, not to swallow me whole. So I walked slowly back to my armchair, sat down, and closed my eyes. In the hush of my own home, I let the shock and sorrow flow through me, acknowledging them without apology. My knee still ached, but tomorrow I would keep that appointment and claim my right to care for myself. And perhaps one day I'd find a new way back to Jenna and Emma, but on my terms, with my boundaries intact. For now, I would sit in the quiet cradle, my own broken heart, and recognize that though a text could change locks on a door, it could not change the love I had built into my bones over a lifetime. And no matter how many doors were closed, there would always be a place where I belonged. I woke before dawn, not to any alarm or sunrise, but to the hush that settled in my home the moment Jenna's text landed. The quiet pressed against my ears, a sound in itself, after years of laughter, of children's footsteps, of the constant hum of family life. I lay in bed for a long minute, listening to the soft tick of the clock and feeling the weight of that single message about locks and boundaries. Then, with a slow exhale, I swung my legs out of bed and padded across the cool hardwood floor. In the kitchen, I poured myself a mug of tea, Earl Grey, the blend I'd always kept for special moments. I carried it to the dining table and sat down, the chair's legs tapping against the floor. The morning light slanted through the window and fell on a stack of envelopes I'd once stored away for memory's sake. I picked up the top, one pale yellow with a black clip, and flipped it open. Inside were documents, receipts, bank statements, canceled checks, and old thank you cards, all proof of a lifetime spent giving. I began to sort through them one by one. There was the mortgage co-signing agreement, my signature curling across the bottom like an unspoken promise: I will support your dream of a home. I remembered the day I signed it, sitting in that lawyer's office, feeling proud to help Jenna and Nate plant roots. Now I traced my finger along the edge of the paper, imagining how quickly that promise was erased. Next came a bank statement showing a $4,300 wire transfer to cover Emma's unexpected NICU bills when Nate's work benefits fell short. I'd sat in my drab living room phone pressed to my ear as I transferred every dollar I had set aside for rainy days, convincing myself that a grandmother's duty was to weather the storms for her grandchildren. My heart squeezed at the memory of that desperate call, and I felt tears prickle behind my eyes. I moved on to a series of grocery store receipts, weekly stipends I'd sent to keep their fridge stocked, marked simply Jenna in the memo lines. I'd imagined her opening that box of cereal when the cupboards were bare, brushing away her worries, at least for a night. I pictured her children reaching for bananas and milk, their faces bright with the security that comes from never knowing hunger. All of those receipts lay here in my hands, silent testaments to a grandmother's quiet sacrifice. On the kitchen counter sat a stack of handmade birthday cards from Emma Crayon. Hearts, shaky block letters spelling out Best Grandma, and one from Jenna herself, a glossy photo card from Emma's first birthday, the front emblazoned with "Thank you, Grandma." I reread Jenna's scrawled note inside. "We couldn't have done this without you." I closed my eyes, letting the grief of unacknowledged devotion wash over me. Her words had once meant the world. Now they haunted me with cruel irony. I gathered the envelopes and laid them in neat piles, down payment medical childcare gifts. It was an inventory not just of money, but of time and energy, nights spent rocking a colicky baby until my shoulders ached, hours at swim lessons and school recitals when I'd rather have slept countless homemade birthday cakes baked from scratch. Each pile was a chapter in my life, a ledger of love. Between the financial records, I found a folder labeled Estate, where I'd once prepared my will. There, among legal jargon, was a list of beneficiaries, Jenna and Nate first, Emma and Tommy next. I remembered the comfort that list had given me, the knowledge that everything I owned would remain in our family. Now that list felt like a relic from another lifetime, one where I still trusted in their gratitude. I sank into the armchair by the window, the piles of receipts and cards resting on the coffee table before me. My tea had gone cold. Outside, a robin hopped along the flower bed, unperturbed by my sorrow. I closed my eyes and let the robin's song fill the silence, reminding me that life continued beyond this heartbreak. When I opened my eyes again, I realized that unspoken ledger had become a burden too heavy to carry alone. For the first time in years, I acknowledged that the constants of giving and support I'd considered my purpose had also allowed me to be taken for granted. My throat tightened with both regret and resolve. Regret for staying silent too long. Resolve to change the balance. I gathered the documents into a single folder and stood knees creaking in protest. The weight in my hands felt real. My sacrifices, my love, my unspoken debts laid bare in black and white. And yet, as I walked toward my desk to file them away, I felt something shift inside, the beginning of recognition that I had given enough and that the next page of my life must be written with both compassion and self-respect. In the echoing quiet of my home, I resolved to honor the ledger of my devotion by finally giving something back to myself. First thing Monday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh pot of coffee and my legal pads spread before me. The silence of the house had deepened over the weekend, settling around me like a shroud. I'd spent days confronting the ledger of what I'd given, and now it was time to reclaim what was mine, to translate resolve into action. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer's office, Alan Rivers, a man who'd handled our family's affairs for decades. His secretary answered, warm and familiar. "Mrs. Joyce, would you like an appointment?" I paused, savoring the moment. "No, thank you. Could you ask Mr. Rivers to step out into the hall? I need to finalize some changes to my will and powers of attorney." Within minutes, I heard his soft knock and then his prompt, "Come in." His office was lined with tall bookcases and the scent of leather-bound volumes. He rose from behind his desk, nodding in greeting. "Good morning, Marilyn. What can I do for you today?" I closed the door and took the seat across from him. I'd like to revoke the power of attorney I granted to my daughter. He lifted his eyebrows, but his expression remained steady. All right, he said, sliding a fresh document across the desk. We can draw up a revocation. Are you certain? I nodded, my fingers brushing over the paper. Absolutely. I no longer want her to have any legal control over my affairs. He offered me a pen. Then please sign here and indicated the revocation clause. My pen scratched across the line, each letter an act of self-assertion. And I'd like to update my will as well, I continued. I want to remove Jenna and Nate as beneficiaries and redirect everything to my niece Claire in Portland. He nodded again and opened a clean will template. We'll change the distribution percentages. Would you like to keep your granddaughter and grandson as contingent beneficiaries? I thought of Emma's sweet drawings of Tommy's gurgles and realized that while my love for them remained, the emotional and financial toll had become too great. No, I said firmly. At least not in this will. Claire's the one who's shown up for me. He tapped his pen thoughtfully. Very well. I'll prepare the new documents. It will take a couple of days to finalize. I exhaled, feeling the first real lightness in weeks. Thank you, Alan. I appreciate your help. Next, I called my bank. There, too, I would assert my boundaries. I explained to the teller that I wished to cancel all automatic transfers to my daughter's accounts. Her eyebrows rose sympathetically as she transferred me to the senior accounts department. The young manager, Derek, answered. Yes, Mrs. Joyce. How can I help you? I'd like to terminate all recurring payments to my daughter's household, I said, my voice steady. And I'd like to discuss setting up a trust for my niece with the funds that were previously earmarked for that purpose. He paused. All of them, I confirmed. I'm aware of the penalties. Please process the cancellations effective immediately. He listed the transfers, grocery stipends, medical bills, the monthly childcare supplement. I let the list scroll without interjection. When he finished, I said, Thank you. Please set up a new trust account for Claire Linton. I'll send you the paperwork. By the end of the call, I felt the breath of my own agency, the power to withhold what had once been given without question. That afternoon, I walked into the local library, my second home for over 40 years, carrying envelopes of documents and a sense of purpose. I found Clara, the branch manager, and explained that I needed to clean out my safe deposit box. Inside, I retrieved a manila folder marked Family Expenses. The list was exhaustive. Every wire transfer, every large grocery order, tuition payments, braces, hospital bills, daycare gaps. Sorting through it on the polished oak table, I felt neither guilt nor shame, only clarity. The folder had served me well, documenting years of generosity. Now it would remain a record, not a blueprint for continued sacrifice. Later at home, I typed a brief cover letter to accompany the paperwork. Revocation of power of attorney revised. Will trust setup instructions, bank transfer cancellations. I tucked each into its appropriate envelope, sealing them with a sense of finality. I didn't mail them immediately. Instead, I laid them on the dining table and sat back, letting the quiet settle. The documents, once invisible threads weaving me into my daughter's life, now lay plain and separate. That evening, I lit a candle in my living room and sank into my favorite armchair. The house felt different, familiar, but unburdened. I poured myself a modest glass of wine, a ritual I rarely indulged in, and let the warmth seep through me. It occurred to me then that boundaries were not acts of withdrawal, but declarations of self-respect. By revoking those legal accoutrements, I had reclaimed my resources and, equally important, my dignity. Outside, the night deepened and the cicadas droned in the warm air. I thought of Jenna and Nate working late, living behind salted locks. I thought of Emma's crayon heart still pinned to my refrigerator and Tommy's tiny sneakers hidden in a box upstairs. I didn't know when or if they would understand my choices, but I felt their echoes gently in my heart. Reminders that love sometimes requires letting go. I finished my wine, then the candle, and climbed the stairs to bed. The satin sheets cool against my skin. My knee still ached, but in a different way, not from giving, but from standing firm. As I drifted off, I felt a steadiness I hadn't known in years, a confidence born from asserting my own needs. Tomorrow, the mail carrier would deliver the envelopes I prepared, and the legal gears would begin to turn. This quiet assertion of boundaries was more than paperwork. It was the first act in a new chapter where I was no longer defined by others' demands, but by my own choices, clear and unapologetic. The morning light slanted through the frosted windows of Alan Rivers's office, painting slashes of gold across the polished mahogany desk. I sat quietly in the leather chair, my heart thudding in my chest, even as I tried to appear calm. Across from me, Alan, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose, folded his hands, and regarded me with a mixture of professional courtesy and genuine concern. "Mrs. Joyce," he began, "I understand you wish to make some significant changes today. Why don't we start with the power of attorney?" His voice was soft, steady, as if he were guiding me across delicate ice. I nodded and lowered my gaze to the document in front of me. It was the same form I had signed 5 years ago, granting Jenna the authority to handle my financial affairs if ever I became incapacitated. That power, once a symbol of trust, had turned into a chain that bound me to obligations I could no longer fulfill. I lifted the pen he offered and placed my signature on the revocation clause, each letter an echo of the resolve I felt hardening inside me. "Done," I said, setting the pen down. The rustle of paper seemed oddly loud in the quiet room. Alan slid the form aside and retrieved my original will. The binding was worn from years of occasional consultation, but the words inside were sharp and clear. Jenna and Nate as primary beneficiaries, followed by Emma and Tommy in educational trusts. I took a steadying breath. "I'd like to revise this," I said. He nodded and handed me a fresh will template. "How would you like to distribute your estate?" "Now." I paused, thinking of Claire, my niece in Portland, the one who had driven 2 states to bring me soup when I'd been sick, who had called each week just to check on me. "I want everything to go to Claire," I said. "She's always been there for me. Please remove my daughter and her family completely." He tapped the new paper thoughtfully. "Okay." He began to type. "I bequeath all of my assets, real property, bank accounts, personal effects to my niece, Claire Linton, absolutely, and in fee, simple." As he read aloud, I followed along, the weight of each phrase settling into my bones. The woman I had been ever accommodating, ever giving, slipped further away, replaced by someone who could finally protect her own heart. "When you're ready," he said, sliding a pen across the desk. I signed. The page crackled under my hand. Alan leaned back. "Everything else is as before." "You still want the charitable donations designated, correct?" I nodded. "A small percentage to the library I had loved, a portion to the local animal rescue. Yes, those remain." He finalized the drafts, then piled the new will and the revocation of power of attorney neatly together. "We'll have these witnessed and notarized, and you'll receive certified copies. Your daughter's power of attorney becomes void as soon as you sign the revocation, and banks will be notified accordingly." I closed my eyes for a moment, picturing the official notices fluttering out from this office into bank vaults, into court registries, each one a seal on my newfound autonomy. "Anything else?" Alan asked. My throat felt tight, but I heard myself say, "I'd like to establish a testamentary trust for Claire as beneficiary. I want the estate placed in trust with Claire as trustee." He smiled faintly. "Very wise. We can structure it so that Claire has access for education, health, or emergencies upon your passing, but retains control as you specify. Would you like to draft a letter of intent as well I did? I'd like to explain my reasons in my own words." He nodded. "I'll attach that letter to the trust document. It won't have legal weight, but it will guide Claire in understanding your intent." I took a deep breath, imagining the day I'd be gone, and Claire reading those words, my final act of transparency and love. We spent the next hour going through every detail. Funeral arrangements, guardianship for any remainder of minor beneficiaries' powers granted to the trustee in case of incapacity. Alan answered my questions with infinite patience, never once betraying judgment. He passed me another pen for initialing each page, and I did so deliberately, watching the ledger of my life shift under my hand. When we reached the last page, he said, "All set, Mrs. Joyce." "Can I get you anything? More coffee?" "No, thank you," I replied, standing as he gathered the papers. My legs felt a bit shaky, but strong. The new will, the trust documents, the revocation, they were stacked in his briefcase, ready to be signed and sealed. He escorted me to the notary station at the back of the office. The notary, a courteous woman with a quiet smile, confirmed my identity and guided me through signatures and oaths. Each signature felt like a lashing against the demands that had weighed me down for so long. Once the notary stamp was inked onto the last page, Alan offered me a folder. "Here are your copies. Keep them in a safe place." He paused, meeting my eyes with a solemn look. "You've done something very important today. Not everyone has the courage to assert these boundaries." I thanked him, my voice thick but sincere. As I stepped out into the hallway, Alan closed the door softly behind me, leaving me with the echo of his words. I drove home with the folder resting on the passenger seat, its weight a gentle ballast. In the rearview mirror, I caught sight of myself, older, yes, but upright and resolute. The city's streets stretched ahead, ordinary and unchanging, but behind me lay a transformation as profound as any grand adventure. At home, I placed the folder on my desk and lingered, touching the leather cover. I felt the pulse of my own heartbeat in my fingertips. The silence in my house greeted me, no longer empty, but expectant a space for me to chart my course. Night fell, and I sat by the window with a candle flickering beside me. In the distance, I could imagine the letters of revocation and trust notices winging their way to banks and courts. My estate, once pledged in perpetual service to a family that had forgotten my worth, would now be held for someone who valued me, my niece, my confidant, my ally in this next chapter. I took a sip of the wine I'd poured earlier. The taste was rich, soft, resonant. I had protected my resources, yes, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my self-respect. Each signature in Alan's office had been a solemn vow I would no longer be taken for granted. I would no longer let my life be dictated by others' needs alone. The ledger of my love would remain a testament to my generosity, but the keys that unlocked it would rest firmly in my own hand. I woke early, the August sun still low in the sky, painting the streets in soft gold. I dressed with care, my favorite blue blouse, the one that made me feel presentable, and a lightweight cardigan, since the bank's air conditioning always ran cold. I tucked the folder of newly signed documents under my arm and grabbed my leather purse, its surface worn but familiar. Today I was going to the branch in person. The drive was quiet, my car's tires humming on the pavement. I replayed the conversation with Alan Rivers in my mind, how calmly I'd signed away Jenna's power of attorney and redirected my will to Claire. There was a weight to it, yes, but mostly I felt relief, as though a door inside me had finally clicked shut. Now at the bank, I needed to finish the work, halting the transfers that had flowed into my daughter's accounts for years. The branch was more spacious than I remembered, with marble floors and high ceilings. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh coffee and new brochures. A few customers sat in scattering chairs, thumbing through magazines or tapping at their phones. I approached the front desk, where a young woman with a name tag that read Maria greeted me with a polite smile. "Good morning, ma'am. How can we help you today?" I returned her smile as best I could, giving my name. "I have some changes I'd like to make to my account. I'd like to cancel all recurring transfers to my daughter's household and also discuss setting up a trust for my niece Claire." Maria's eyebrows lifted just slightly, but she kept her voice even. "Of course, Mrs. Joyce. Let me pull up your account details. If you'll sign in here, I can transfer you to the senior accounts manager. She handed me a digital pad, and I entered my PIN. Then she directed me toward a comfortable row of chairs beside the glass-walled conference rooms. A minute later, Derek, the senior manager I'd spoken with on the phone, emerged. He was in his late 40s, crisply dressed, with glasses that made his gaze seem sharp and precise. He offered his hand. "Good morning, Mrs. Joyce. Please come in." His office was smaller, cozier, plush chairs, a large desk with a polished surface, the sunlight filtering through Venetian blinds. He motioned to a seat across from him. I settled in, placing my purse at my feet. "I understand you'd like to make some changes to your account," Derek began. "Can you tell me exactly what you have in mind?" I reached for my coffee mug. Maria had brought it promptly and took a steadying sip. "Yes. I want to cancel all automatic transfers to my daughter's household, effective immediately. And I'd like to redirect those funds into a trust account for my niece, Claire Linton." He nodded, pulling up a list of my recurring transactions. "I see here the weekly grocery stipends, the quarterly medical bill payments, the monthly childcare transfers. And there's also the annual tuition support. You want all of these canceled." He named each one as if reading a roll call of past kindnesses. "All of them," I said, meeting his gaze. "My support for them no longer requires erasing my own needs. I'm going to be truthful here. Continuing these payments would come at the cost of my own financial security and peace of mind. I need to stop." He studied me quietly for a moment, then nodded. "Understood. I'll process the cancellations today. You may incur some early termination penalties that's standard for recurring arrangements. Is that acceptable?" I nodded. "Please go ahead." While he typed commands and made phone calls to other departments, I watched him work. The phones rang, colleagues came and went, and in the flurry of business, I felt oddly calm. When he finished, he turned back to me. "All recurring transfers have been canceled. You'll see it reflected in your balance today, and statements will show them as stopped. Next, about the trust account." He opened another window on his computer, displaying a list of account types. "We can set up an irrevocable trust in your name with Claire as the beneficiary. You'd fund it with any amount you choose from your checking or savings, and she could access the principal or interest under the terms you specify." I leaned forward, feeling a thrill at the prospect. "Yes, I'd like the funds that previously went to Jenna's household if I still have any earmarked balance to go into that trust. My niece has already agreed to act as trustee. She's been my rock these past few weeks." Derek's fingers danced over the keyboard. "I'll draw up the trust documents and the funding schedule. You can choose to make a one-time deposit or schedule transfers from this account monthly, quarterly, or annually. Which would you prefer?" I paused to think weekly transfers had been a burden for my daughter. I didn't want to replicate that pattern. A one-time deposit seems best, I decided. "I'll transfer the total sum this afternoon." He nodded. "Very well. I'll prepare the paperwork and have it ready for your signature before you leave. Is there anything else?" I reached into my purse and pulled out my lawyer's revocation of power of attorney. I also have this document revoking the power of attorney previously granted to my daughter. I'd like the bank to note that so she can no longer initiate any transactions on my behalf. Derek took the paper, scanning it briefly. "Yes, ma'am. We have to send this to our legal department and flag your file. I'll send it through today." I felt the finality of it settle around me as though each piece of paper I handed over were wings lifting burdens away. "Thank you," I said softly. "Thank you for handling this." He printed the trust documents, then slid them across the desk. I read the summary: irrevocable trust, Claire Linton as trustee, distribution only for education, healthcare, housing, or emergency expenses, 90 days notice required for any withdrawal. I initialed each page and signed at the bottom, "No hesitation." When I finished, Derek offered me 2 copies. One for your records, one you'll give to your niece. I'll also send you a summary email and a formal confirmation by mail. I nodded, accepting the folder. My hand shook just slightly from the gravity of the moment.
This, this means a lot, I said. It feels like reclaiming part of myself. He stood and extended his hand. It's your right to manage your resources as you see fit. I'm glad we could get this done today. His smile was kind, genuine. As I walked back through the lobby, the polished floors gleamed under my footsteps. The swirl of daily banking life continued around me, someone applying for a mortgage, another opening a new checking account, but I felt centered, as though a calm current ran through my chest. I moved with purpose to the ATM area, withdrew the funds from my savings account, and walked to the teller to deposit them into the newly opened trust. When the mechanical hum of the deposit finalized, I felt the liberating clarity of boundary making settle into my bones. No longer would my generosity serve as an open tap for anyone else's needs. I had asserted my right to self-care in the most concrete way by managing my own money on my own terms. Outside, the August heat pressed against me as I stepped onto the sidewalk. I tucked the trust folder under my arm, slid the revocation paperwork into my purse, and inhaled deeply. The world beyond the bank doors, traffic's rush neighbors' greetings, the distant bark of a dog seemed to welcome me back into my own space. Driving home, I felt lighter. The road stretched out before me like a promise that a woman on the wrong side of 60 could still make powerful choices, draw firm lines, and reclaim her life. My support for my daughter's family had been unwavering for years. Now, at last, I would support myself with equal devotion. The sun dipped lower in the sky, and I realized that boundaries, though difficult to set, were the foundation of genuine love, love that honors both giver and receiver. I placed a clean sheet of creamy stationery on my desk, the surface smooth beneath my fingertips. The lamp cast a pool of light across the page, making the blank space feel both inviting and vast, a space where all the words I'd held in for weeks could finally pour out. My pen hovered above the paper, and I closed my eyes, remembering the sound of Jenna's voice when she told me I wasn't being supportive. The memory stung, so I inhaled slowly and began to write Jenna. I've stared at this page for longer than I care to admit. A lifetime of words left unspoken, and now finally there's room for the ones that matter most. I'm writing not because I expect you to read this, not because I want to heal any rifts with placations or apologies, but because I need you to understand the cost of my silence. My pen tapped gently as I paused, recalling all the mornings I'd awakened to feed Emma at 3 a.m., carrying her into the rocking chair by the window, lullabies half-formed on my lips. I remembered the ache in my knee from chasing after that determined toddler, the feel of her sticky fingers in mine as she learned to walk. I thought about the nights I'd lain awake worrying over her fevers, willing them to break before sunrise. How had all those countless acts of love gone unseen? I wrote on. For years, I believed that being a good mother and grandmother meant saying yes whenever you needed me, being the steady hand you could count on at any hour. I took pride in being dependable, willing to rearrange my life for yours. Yet now I see that each yes I offered became a brick in a wall between us. You came to expect my sacrifice as if it were your birthright and never noticed the doors closing behind me. My pen paused over the paper and I pushed back from the desk, closing my eyes to gather more resolve. The quiet of the room wrapped around me like a blanket, the only sound my own breathing. I thought of the mortgage co-signed in better days, of the thousands of dollars I'd sent to cover daycare and dental bills, of the piles of receipts hidden in my desk drawer. I didn't want to shame her. I simply needed her to see. I bent to continue. You see, your decision to bar me from your home with a text message was not just a refusal. It was the culmination of unspoken debts I'd carried alone. Those automatic transfers I canceled were more than financial transactions. They were the breadcrumbs of my devotion scattered over years, as I believed love meant giving, until nothing was left for myself. I'm not angry, or at least not only angry. I'm grieving the version of myself who believed she could sacrifice without cost. I'm grieving the loss of the seamless trust I once felt when your door opened at my knock.
Now that the lock has changed, I must measure what remains of my worth and rebuild my life around it. My hand shook as I wrote those words, and I swallowed hard, tasting the salt of tears I didn't dare let fall. I reached for a fresh tissue on the table, dabbed at my eyes, and pressed on. I'm not asking you to apologize, though your silence stings almost as sharply as your words. I'm not pleading for forgiveness or reconciliation tonight. I simply want you to know that every gift I offered, every favor I granted came from love, not obligation. And when you changed those locks, you erased more than my key's privilege. You erased the safety of knowing I was welcome. I paused again, reflecting on how many times I'd found myself canceling my own doctor's appointments, skipping my physical therapy sessions, prioritizing your needs over my health. I remembered dragging myself home with my knee throbbing, convinced that the well-being of your family was worth every bit of pain. Now those sacrifices felt like a ledger I could no longer ignore. I lifted my pen for the final lines. So I closed this letter without mailing it, because today I honor the boundary set for me. I will no longer vanish into the background of your life for the sake of convenience. My time, my health, and my own dreams are now as important as any promise I made to support you. There is space here, space for my own healing, my own purpose beyond the roles you once asked me to fill. If one day you come to understand what has been lost, you will know where to find me. Until then, I keep these words here as a testament to the love that compelled me to give, and the courage that finally compelled me to reclaim my own life. With love, Mom. I set the pen down and reread the letter, feeling the tremor in my chest calm into something firm. Outside, the sky was turning from twilight to deep indigo, and I realized I'd written more to myself than to Jenna. This was an act of self-recognition, a way to unburden the heavy ledger of unacknowledged devotion. Folding the letter neatly, I tucked it into an envelope and labeled it simply, to lose or keep. I placed it in a drawer in my desk, out of sight but not out of mind. Then I sat back and let my head fall against the back of the chair, the quiet around me full of possibility. In that moment, I understood that boundaries aren't just about pushing others away. They're about drawing lines around the self, marking the territory where love is mutual, where respect is earned, and where giving is balanced by receiving. The letter remained unsent, but its purpose was served. It had given voice to years of silent sacrifice, and in doing so, had opened the door to the next chapter of my life, one written on my own terms with pages wide open for whatever came next. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced at the screen, Jenna, in bold letters. I let it ring out. A few minutes later, another buzz, David, my son's name. I braced myself and swiped to see the first message. Jenna, Mom, please call us. This has gone too far. We need to talk. 12 unread messages from her followed, each more insistent than the last. We're worried about you. This isn't like you. Emma keeps asking where you are. Can we please fix this? I thumbed through them without replying, feeling the old tug of guilt even as I reminded myself of every boundary I'd set over the past days. Then came a string of missed calls, 2 from Jenna, 3 from David. I imagined their voices fraught with confusion, perhaps tinged with anger. I remembered Jenna's cold text telling me not to come by, and David's clipped voicemail asking if something had happened to me. In their minds, my absence was an emergency. In mine, it was a necessary pause. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed with another text, this time from David. David, Mom. We don't understand what you're doing. It's causing chaos here. This is your family and we need you. I read the message twice, feeling the old ache of being perpetually on call for emergencies, not my own. Mom? I whispered aloud, as though speaking would make the sense of intrusion vanish. The sun outside my window dipped low, casting the kitchen in a soft glow that felt at odds with the tension pulsing in my hands. A few minutes later, the landline rang, Jenna's preferred battleground. I lifted the receiver on the second ring. Mom, are you there? Her voice was tight, hurried as though she was expecting me to snap back into my old role at any moment. "I'm here, Jenna," I said calmly, leaning against the counter to support my aching knee. "I just got your letter," she began, her words spilling out. "I don't get why you're punishing us like this. Why are you doing all this legal stuff?" I could almost see her pacing on the other end. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I'm taking care of myself. My support for you has never required erasing my own needs." My heart pounded against my ribs, but my voice stayed even. She sighed heavily. "We have so much going on: work bills, Emma's school schedule. I didn't realize how hard things had become until you stopped sending money." She stopped, her breath catching. "I'm sorry you feel hurt, but this is hurting us, Mom." I listened in silence, remembering the nights I'd spent at her house, cleaning up after her busy schedule, the weekends I'd sacrificed for her milestones. Now my stillness was the crisis. "I'm sorry you're struggling," I said, "but I cannot continue to support you at the expense of my own health and security." Click. She hung up. I closed my eyes, letting the counter absorb the last echo of her voice. Then the landline rang again, David this time. I answered. "Mom, I don't know how to talk to you anymore," he said, voice unsteady. "I thought I could rely on you, but now I feel like I've lost my safety net." The word safety net stung me. I had been that net for decades, and now I was letting go. "David," I said softly, "I never intended to abandon you. I intended to reclaim my life." There was a pause. "Then I understand that this change has caught you off guard." He let out a slow breath. "I just wish you had told me this face to face," he said. "A letter, a text changing locks. It's like you didn't trust me enough to see you." His hurt was palpable. "I did trust you," I replied. "That's why I acted decisively. I trust myself to know what I need." I could hear the conflict in his sigh. "I love you, David. I'm still here. I just won't be the unpaid caregiver anymore." There was another pause. Then, "Mom, I'm sorry. I wish you'd given me a chance to understand before shutting me out." I pressed my hand against the window pane, thinking of how many times I had come to his rescue, the scrapes I'd kissed, the leases I'd co-signed. "Perhaps one day," I said, "you'll see that boundaries are sometimes the strongest act of love." I hung up my calm voice, echoing in the small kitchen. The silence that followed was thick, not empty, but heavy, with unresolved words. I sat at the table, my untouched cup of tea cooling between my hands. Outside, the sky bled orange and purple, punctuated by the steady hum of evening traffic. Inside, my phone lay face up, blinking with unsent replies that felt inadequate. I thought of Emma's texts, her small, hopeful words asking if she could visit. I pulled out my letter to her, the one about the ocean and the cat, and read it again. My granddaughter still saw me as Grandma first, caretaker second. She had not changed the locks on my heart. Maybe for her the old relationship could persist if I let it. But for Jenna and David, I had to remain firm. The day darkened around me, and I turned off the lamp, letting the overhead light take over. In that glow, I made a quiet vow I would neither hide from their calls nor crumble under their pressure. I would respond on my own terms when and if I chose, but I would not revert to the role that had cost me my sense of self. I picked up my phone, scrolled through the messages from Jenna and David, and tapped "Do Not Disturb." Let them leave voicemails. Let them stew in their confusion and impatience. For the first time in a long time, I was not compelled to repair every rupture at the expense of my own peace. Standing, I walked to the window and looked out at the silhouette of my quiet street. Cars passed with their headlights on, neighbors walked dogs, and children shrieked in the distance, riding bikes with streamers fluttering behind them. Life went on, whether or not I answered those calls. And somewhere in that half-lit evening, I felt the steady pulse of my own heartbeat, a reminder that at last I was listening to the one voice that mattered most, my own. I heard the knock before I saw Lorraine's car pull into the driveway, 3 firm raps, like she'd practiced them to announce herself without fuss. It was early afternoon, and I'd just finished tidying the dining table after my solitary lunch, the sunlight falling in squares across the placemats. My stomach tightened with anticipation. I'd not seen Lorraine since her husband's memorial last spring, but something about her presence always made the world feel steadier. I opened the door to find her standing there with a paper bag in hand, cinnamon rolls peeking from the top like jeweled treasures. She wore comfortable jeans and a soft sweater, her silver hair pulled back in a low ponytail. Behind her eyes was that same mixture of warmth and clear-sighted understanding I'd always admired. "I thought you might need these," she said, lifting the bag, as though offering the world's most precious gifts. The aroma warm dough sugar spice drifted out and wrapped around me. I stepped aside and ushered her in. Lorraine set the bag gently on the kitchen counter. "Too early for me to assume you're baking," she teased, but the corners of her mouth quivered with emotion I recognized. She knew what I'd been through. I poured 2 cups of tea, her constant request Earl Grey with a splash of milk, and led her to the living room. The cinnamon rolls rested on the coffee table, and I motioned for her to sit. She sank into the armchair opposite mine, as if coming home no awkwardness, no invitation necessary. I handed her a roll, and she broke it open, the layers pulling apart with a satisfying tear. "You have no idea how perfect this is," she said, taking a bite. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring it. I watched her, the simple joy on her face reminding me of happier days when the world was smaller and friends' visits meant gossip and shared laughter, not sympathy. Lorraine swallowed, her expression gentle. "You've been through hell, Marilyn. I'm so sorry." She didn't wait for me to respond. Instead, she reached out and squeezed my hand, her fingers cool against my skin. I took a deep breath, the warmth of her touch anchoring me. "It's been a revelation," I admitted, selecting my words carefully. I never realized how much I'd lost myself in all those years of giving. Saying no even once felt like treason. Then they changed the locks, and suddenly I had no choice but to face what I'd been ignoring. Lorraine nodded, her eyes never leaving mine. "Change the locks," she repeated softly. That was a powerful moment. "You weren't just locked out of their house, you were locked out of being taken for granted." She paused, her gaze kind. "And you responded by setting boundaries. That takes courage." I sipped my tea, letting her words settle. It stung, but it was true. I met with my lawyer, canceled the power of attorney, rewrote my will, stopped the automatic transfers at the bank. I even drafted a letter to Jenna. Didn't send it, just wrote it. My voice wavered slightly. It felt necessary. Lorraine leaned forward, her expression full of empathy. "You've drawn a line in the sand. And not just for their sake, but for yours." She folded her hands around the roll. "You're doing exactly what none of us ever taught you to do. You're putting yourself first." Her words, honest and unvarnished, cut through layers of doubt I hadn't even admitted to myself. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far. I confessed if I was too harsh. She shook her head, a small, deliberate gesture. "Harsh implies cruelty," she said carefully. "You're not cruel, you're clear. You finally recognize that support without reciprocity can become exploitation. You aren't punishing them, you're protecting yourself. And that protection is not only justified, but vital." I closed my eyes against the surge of relief. Lorraine's validation, so freely given without judgment, felt like water to a parched throat. "I've been so lonely," I whispered. "They're my family, but I was left standing in the cold." Lorraine's voice was soft but unwavering. Family doesn't automatically earn the right to your sacrifices. You have a lifetime of love recorded in receipts and transfers, but love isn't a ledger to be checked off. It's a promise of mutual care. When it's one-sided, it's not love, it's duty, one that you chose for too long. I exhaled the tension in my shoulders, loosening. What do I do now? The question felt both urgent and absurd. I had spent days building legal fortresses and emotional walls, but now I faced the uncharted territory of life on the other side of giving. Lorraine leaned back, musing over another bite. Now you live. You nourish yourself as freely as you nourish them. You keep writing letters, poems, journals, whatever helps you make sense of this. And you let yourself be taken care of too, hard as that might feel. I nodded, imagining the blank pages of my notebook filling with new truths. Thoughts of volunteering at the library, of taking a short trip to visit Claire, of simply reading a novel without interruption. These flickered like candles in my mind. Lorraine stood brushing crumbs from her fingers onto a napkin. I should let you be, she said, heading toward the door. But remember this, you're not alone. I'm here, and I'll show up with cinnamon rolls whenever you need them. I rose and embraced her, the scent of sugar and spice surrounding us. Her arms were solid, constant. Thank you, I whispered, for everything. She squeezed me again and let go. Go on now. Make yourself a promise to do something kind for yourself today. And then do it. With that, she walked into the afternoon sun and drove away, leaving me with the quiet hum of reassurance. I returned to the coffee table, taking a final bite of cinnamon roll, the sweetness lingering on my tongue like a benediction. The house no longer felt empty, but imbued with a warmth that had nothing to do with the oven. Lorraine's visit had reminded me that chosen solidarity, friendship, can be as sustaining as blood ties. In her presence, I found empathy and validation I hadn't known I needed. And in that, I discovered the courage to continue building a life that honored both my capacity to give and my right to be cared for in return. I sat at my kitchen table late into the night, the soft hum of the laptop's fan the only sound in the hushed house. My fingers hovered over the purchase button on the flight booking page, a one-way ticket to Portland, then an Amtrak ride down to the Oregon coast. My heart fluttered with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Months of legal changes and boundary setting had brought me here, finally ready to step off a path defined by other people's expectations and onto a new road of my own choosing. I reviewed the itinerary one more time. Departure on Thursday morning, arriving in Portland at midday, the train to Coos Bay, leaving the station just after 2. I calculated that by early evening, I'd be at my niece Claire's house, welcomed by the salt scent of the sea and her steady presence. No calls to Jenna, no texts from David, just me, my suitcase, and the wide blue horizon. With a decisive click, I confirmed the booking. The confirmation email arrived almost immediately. I leaned back in my chair, watching the screen glow. A one-way ticket, no return date, no pinned expectations for a homecoming. I wasn't certain I wanted just yet. I closed my eyes and let that fact soak in. I was free to choose how, when, or even if I returned. Over the next couple of days, I prepared with deliberate calm. I packed my suitcase, carefully sturdy walking shoes for the misty coastal paths, warm sweaters in muted blues and greens, my favorite scarf, navy wool, soft enough to fold into a ball in my pocket, and a stack of notebooks I'd bought on sale last week. In the drawer beside my dresser, I placed a note for Carol, my neighbor, asking her to water the plants and collect the mail. I didn't need to explain my destination. A trip sufficed. On Wednesday evening, I walked the quiet streets of my neighborhood one last time, past the bakery I used to go to with Emma when she was small, past the library with its broad front steps where I'd volunteered for so many years. The porch lights glowed in friendly circles, but none for me anymore. I inhaled the landscape deeply, memorizing each curve of the sidewalk, each flicker of light through the hedges. Back home, I set my alarm for 5 a.m., knowing that by sunrise my train to the airport would be waiting. I slept lightly, dreams of roaring waves and distant lighthouses filling my mind. When the alarm buzzed, I dressed slowly, not in a hurry, but with purpose. Each pull of the blouse over my head, each adjustment of the scarf, a reaffirmation of my choice. The taxi arrived as promised, and I waved goodbye to the empty house, its silence full of memories. I felt neither guilty nor sad. Instead, there was a clear-eyed anticipation humming in my veins. The drive to the station took mere minutes, but covered years of emotional distance from the daughter who felt obliged to say yes to the woman who could now say no, and then take a plane out anyway. At the terminal, I checked in at the kiosk, collected my boarding pass printed with a seat in row 16A, an aisle seat just as I'd requested, so I could stretch my legs and watch the world glide by. The gate agent stamped my passport with a practiced, "Have a nice flight," and I managed a small smile in return. As I walked toward the security check, I passed families with roller bags and excited children dragging parents with balloons in hand. None of them wore my look of secret triumph. I paused for a moment, letting the sense of being somewhere I truly belonged wash over me, even though it was only halfway across the country. On the plane, I settled in my scarf, folded neatly in my lap. The seat beside me remained empty until final boarding, when a young couple with a toddler squeezed past and offered a polite nod. I closed my eyes and let the engine's rumble lull me into a rare peace. I pulled out my notebook and wrote a single sentence I honored myself today. Flying above the clouds, I thought of the long years I'd surrendered to other people's demands, of the slow erosion of my own needs. I remembered the anger that had bloomed when I first read that text about locks and boundaries, and how it had propelled me into action. Now that the legal and financial battles were behind me, this physical journey felt like the final page of a chapter, one I'd written with determination, not desperation. Touching down in Portland, I retrieved my bag from the conveyor and navigated to the Amtrak station, where the coastal train waited with its sleek silver cars. I boarded and chose a window seat, the landscape unfolding in gentle waves of green as we headed south. The air carried a soft chill, and I pulled my cardigan tighter around me, the fabric a comforting memory of home. Hours later, the train slowed as we approached the coast. Beyond the fog-lined windows lay the Pacific, its surface a steady pulse of gray. The station was small, a scattering of tracks beside a single platform. I stepped onto the gravel, inhaling the briny breeze. A figure stood on the platform, Claire, waving with both hands, her bright jacket a beacon against the muted landscape.
She hurried across the tracks and enveloped me in a hug that felt like a benediction. "Welcome home," she said, her voice warm and certain. "We've got dinner on the stove and the fireplace warming already." Her arms were familiar territory, a place where I could finally exhale. I noticed the key she held, dangling from her fingers, the key to her guest room door, mine, to use as long as I wished. "Thank you," I whispered against her shoulder. We walked toward her car, the station's overhead lights casting a soft glow on wet pavement. I glanced back once at the train sliding away into the mist, then turned forward, ready for the next steps of this new chapter. As we drove through winding roads lined with fir trees, the ocean's roar growing louder. With each turn, I realized that this journey, physical and emotional, had begun with a refusal and culminated in choice. I had moved away from the demands that once erased me and toward a place where my presence was welcomed unconditionally and without apology. By the time we arrived at Claire's house, a cozy cottage perched on a bluff, the sky had darkened to indigo. The porch light glowed a warm invitation. I stepped across the threshold into a kitchen filled with the promise of soup and fresh bread. The scent was as nourishing as any legal document or bank transaction I'd executed. In the quiet of her home, I set down my suitcase and looked out at the ocean's horizon, feeling the immense sustaining power of chosen solidarity.
Here on my own terms, I had finally come back to myself. I woke to the sound of gulls circling overhead and the soft whistle of wind through the eaves. Pulling back the curtains of the guest room, I gazed out at the gray-blue water stretching toward the horizon, the sea and sky meeting in a line so far I almost couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The morning light was gentle here, filtered through low clouds, casting everything in a calm, forgiving glow. I padded down the narrow hallway to Claire's kitchen, where the kettle was already humming on the stove. She left 2 mugs on the counter, one with my name scrawled on it in her neat handwriting. The rim was chipped in a way that made it feel perfectly mine. I filled it with strong coffee and a splash of cream, then settled into the wicker chair by the window, wrapping my cardigan around my shoulders. Steam curled from the mug, carrying the warm scent of comfort. Claire appeared with a plate of freshly baked scones, golden and still steaming, their cinnamon sugar crusts crackling under her napkin. "I hope you like them," she said, brushing flour from her hands. "I found the recipe at the bakery in town, best I've ever tasted." I broke off a piece, its crumb tender and rich with butter. "They're perfect," I said softly, savoring the taste. It felt strange, delicious, even to indulge without guilt or calculation. No one was tallying the calories or expecting me to wash dishes afterward. I simply ate, letting each bite anchor me in the present. After breakfast, Claire suggested a walk along the beach. We donned our coats, mine navy wool, hers bright yellow, and stepped onto the sand. The beach was quiet, save for a few early morning fishermen and a lone jogger whose footprints disappeared quickly in the soft, wet sand. The tide was low, revealing glistening shells and smooth stones. I bent to pick up a heart-shaped pebble, tracing its edges with a finger, thinking about how perfectly shaped it was, not for anyone's needs, but its own. We walked in comfortable silence, the sea breeze tugging at our scarves, salt stinging my cheeks. My heart felt lighter here, unburdened by the demands and disappointments that had followed me home. In this moment, I was simply a woman walking beside the ocean. As we reached a driftwood log, Claire sat and patted the spot beside her. I joined her, resting my hands on my knees. We watched waves ripple and fold back on themselves and retreat. "It's peaceful here," I said, almost to myself. She nodded, smiling. "It's been my sanctuary since I was a kid. I wanted you to feel that too." She handed me a thermos of hot tea, lemon, and honey, my favorite, for the walk back. The tea was warm, soothing each sip a balm to the tension I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I looked at Claire, at her calm, caring eyes, and felt gratitude. Not for what she'd done for me, but for who she was. Someone who chose empathy over obligation, presence over performance. That afternoon, I curled up in the sunroom with a book I'd brought, a novel I'd bought on a whim months ago, but never had time to read. The room was bright, filled with pillows and blankets, and the windows let in the sea breeze. I turned the pages slowly, relishing the escape. Each chapter felt like permission to exist for myself alone, with no agenda beyond the story unfolding in my hands. When I looked up, the sun had shifted lower, and I noticed the small table by the window where Emma's postcard from Lisbon still hung pinned beside a dried sprig of lavender from my garden. My phone buzzed, and I saw a text from her. "Emma, Grandma, guess where I am? I'm at the art museum. I drew a picture for you. I'll send it as soon as I get home. XOXO. My heart warmed at the sight of her words, unfiltered, enthusiastic, authentically her. I tapped a quick reply. Me. I can't wait to see it, sweetheart. I'm on the coast. The sea is loud, and it's wonderful. Love you. Her reply came almost immediately. MIA. Love you too. Have fun. I sat back, the corners of my mouth lifting in a genuine smile. Her affection felt unburdened, unaccompanied by obligation or expectation. She simply loved me, Grandma. No strings attached. It reminded me how love can survive boundaries when it's rooted in authenticity. Later, Claire invited me to help her in the garden. we dug in damp soil, planting lavender and rosemary in neat rows. My hands, though arthritic, found a rhythm in the work, dig, place, pat down. It felt good to be useful again, but not for someone else's crisis. For the simple act of nurturing life. The rosemary's evergreen scent drifted around us, blending with the salty air. As the day waned, we returned indoors for dinner, cream of mushroom soup and crusty bread from the local bakery. We ate at the small kitchen table, talking easily about everything and nothing. My legal adventures, her work-from-home routine, books we wanted to read. When I mentioned Jenna's latest texts, Claire listened without judgment, her gaze steady. "They'll come around," she said. "Kids often need time to learn where the line is." I sipped my soup, feeling more grounded than I had in months. Here my needs were understood, my boundaries respected, my presence valued. The simple joys, tea scones, beach walks, garden soil. Under my nails felt like the building blocks of a life, measured by what mattered to me, not by what others demanded. That night in the guest room, I journaled about the day, the taste of lemon honey tea, the sound of waves, Emma's text, the comforting weight of rosemary sprigs. I realized I was filling these pages not with appeals or apologies, but with observations of my own contentment. The notebook's blank spaces were no longer daunting. They were invitations to chart a path forward. As I turned off the light, I heard the distant crash of surf and the gentle rustle of curtains in the breeze. I breathed in the scent of lavender and salt, feeling my chest expand with gratitude. Tomorrow I might walk the beach again, or simply sit with a mug of tea and watch the tide. And that would be enough. In this place, on my own terms, I was reconnecting with myself, rediscovering the joys that had slipped through my fingers in the rush to please others. The granddaughter's tender texts reminded me that love, when grounded in honesty, can indeed survive the strongest of boundaries. And with that thought, I drifted off to sleep, buoyed by the certainty that this was the life I had chosen, and the life I was reclaiming one gentle moment at a time. I pulled into my driveway just before dusk, the house lit by the soft glow of the setting sun. The lock on my front door, new, unfamiliar, still bore witness to my daughter's silent decree. It gleamed against the weathered wood, unchanged since she first turned that key without me, but as I climbed the steps, I felt a shift inside. The lock had lost its power over me. I held the key she'd given me, Claire's gift, a symbol not of exclusion but of choice, and slipped it into my pocket without a second thought. Inside, the room smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets I'd placed in the linen closet before I left. Everything appeared exactly as I'd left it. The chipped ceramic bowl by the sink, the photo of Paul on the mantel, the stack of library books on the coffee table. Yet the air felt different, charged with possibility rather than the weight of obligation. I carried a small box from my car out to the kitchen. Inside were the items I'd decided to release: the navy blue scarf Jenna had given me 5 Christmases ago, still soft but carrying too many layers of surrender. The well-worn copy of Family Legacies that had sat on my shelf, reminders of a life spent in service. And a handful of crumpled notes, old grocery lists, invitations. I'd canceled birthday cards I'd saved out of duty rather than delight. I set each item on the countertop, regarding them with clear eyes. As I lifted the scarf, memories flashed: the way I smiled through 2 tight ties so Jenna could have her photos, the way I stifled my own dreams so my son's future never lacked financial cushion. But now these tokens of misplaced loyalty belonged no longer to my story. I folded the scarf once more and placed it in the box, closing the lid gently. Then I carried it to the front porch and set it beside a potted fern for the women's shelter donation drive. The plant's fronds brushed against the box as if in farewell. Back inside, I wandered through the rooms like a guest rediscovering a home. In the living room, I plucked the stack of library books from the coffee table, titles I'd picked up to lend Jenna to babysit her children over or to impress her with my knowledge. One by one, I placed them on the shelf above the fireplace, positioning them like old friends I intended to revisit on my own time, no longer as a means to an end. Next, I moved to the small desk in the corner, dusting off the surface until it gleamed. It was the place I'd drafted legacies and tender letters unsent in the bottom drawer. I opened it to find that folded envelope addressed to Jenna, the one I'd never mailed. I slipped it back in and locked the drawer, a symbolic gesture of owning my story without needing her acknowledgement. The phone buzzed with a message from the library. Could you come by tomorrow morning to help sort donations? My chest swelled with a quiet thrill. I typed back, I'll be there. In that simple exchange lay the promise of reclaiming my past passions, of returning to the place that had given me identity beyond motherhood and sacrifice. That night, I made tea and sat on the porch with a notebook in my lap. The neighborhood lights winked on one by one, a silent audience to my thoughts. I wrote, Today I stepped into the quiet power of my choices. I am no longer defined by the fences others build around me. I underlined it twice and closed the book with a soft snap. Morning arrived brisk and bright. I dressed in comfortable jeans and a warm sweater, slipped on my sturdy boots, and walked the 6 blocks to the library. The familiar stone building rose in front of me, its glass doors reflecting the sky. Inside, Elena, the assistant manager whom I had once helped train, greeted me with genuine delight. "You're back," she said, her smile warm. I settled in among the stacks of donated books, sorting and cataloging with the ease of long-practiced familiarity. My knees ached less amid the quiet rhythm of shelved titles than they had when propped on toddler high chairs. Each book I touched felt like a testament to a life that could be mine well lived, not just well given. Later, I paused in the children's corner where a group of young readers gathered around a volunteer. I recognized the soft hush of anticipation in their voices and remembered the days I'd led Story Hour, their bright faces reflecting the tales I spun. I approached the volunteer, offered to help, and soon found myself leaning forward, reading Where the Wild Things Are with gusto, the children hanging on every roar. After the session, a little boy tugged at my sleeve. "Will you come back tomorrow, Grandma?" he asked, eyes wide and innocent. I laughed, the chime of it light and free. "I'm not your grandma, sweetie," I said gently, "but I'll be right here if you need another wild rumpus." In the afternoon sunlight, I walked home feeling decidedly taller in my own skin. The house greeted me with its familiar corners and soft hush. I made myself a light supper, roasted vegetables and a piece of grilled fish, and ate at the kitchen table. In the quiet, I could hear my own breathing, the gentle hum of life that belonged only to me. Just as I was clearing my plate, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Jenna. "Mom, the lock is still stuck. Could you give me a hand? I can't reach you any other way." My heart fluttered at the familiarity of it, the implicit request for help, the shared history. I stared at the message, then thought of the boundaries I'd held, of the woman I'd become. I set the plate down, took a steadying breath, and typed, "I'm sorry I can't help tonight. I have volunteer obligations. I'll send Claire your request to meet you tomorrow afternoon. Love, Mom." I hit send, a soft exhale following. No frantic apologies, no groveling. Just a clear, honest response that honored both her need and my own limits. That night, I stood on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset fade to twilight. The lock on my door remained unchanged, but the burden it once carried had lifted. In its place was a quiet confidence, a knowledge that my worth was not contingent on anyone's convenience. I sipped my wine and thought of Emma's postcard on my fridge, Claire's key in my drawer, the library waiting for me tomorrow. I felt whole, anchored in self-respect, buoyed by chosen community, unafraid of the boundaries I drew. Inside, the lights gleamed softly. I turned off the porch lamp and stepped back into my house, the door opening easily for me. In the silence, I whispered, "This is my life now," and let the quiet power of my choices settle around me like a comfortable cloak.